It's Friday afternoon, so you know what that means. Another episode of Love and Construction. We're your host, Jill Silverstein. I am joined alongside my new husband,
Michael Battista.
All right, so we're here today. Michael and I are both real estate brokers in the Chicago market, and Mike has been doing this for a little bit longer than I have. And we love to collaborate. We both run our own teams, and we are 2 months into our marriage. We just got married in Paris, and here we are to talk about something that is very prevalent in the Chicago market, new construction. So today we have Michael Battista with us because Michael has decades, plural, of experience working with developers and selling all around Chicago, all different types of new construction, buildings, land opportunities, and he knows a lot. Obviously, as a buyer broker and representing a lot of buyers in the new construction world, there is a lot to know. So, Michael, what is your Cliff Note version elevator pitch on your experience with new construction?
Well, first off, I can't believe I'm sitting here. This is something I didn't think I'd ever do, but here I am. All for love, basically. So my elevator pitch for new construction would be, in terms of what I've done.
Yeah, your background.
As Jill said, I've been in real estate for 22 years. I've probably done about 150 projects out there in various development capacities, whether they be a ground up 3-flat, 6-flat, 8-flat, 20 units, 40 units, whatever. Rehab of center entrance 6 flats, rehabs of courtyard buildings, things of that nature. So a lot of different product, a lot of different styles, a lot of different areas in Chicago.
And selling new construction, whether it's a single family or a condo and a 3-flat, is an extremely different, much more complicated process than selling a resale of a condo that, is 5, 10, 15, 20 years old. So I'd like to talk today a little bit about this process because I feel like, and I know a lot of buyers out there might be a little lost on where to begin. And I know that it can be very challenging for agents as well to be able to represent their buyers in the right way
For sure.
When they're going to see these potential opportunities. So to begin, I guess let's sort of strip it down and talk about how it all kind of works. Okay. So as an agent, I get a phone call. Clients are interested in pursuing a new construction opportunity. And first I tell them that they're crazy and they shouldn't be looking at new.
What are you talking about? It's the best way to buy something.
Yeah. Everybody wants new.
It's not the easiest.
It's
but
not
it's
the
probably
easiest.
one of the better things you can do.
My problem is that I feel that not the guys that you work for and you work with, that is the exception, but generally the developers that I have had the pleasure of working with in the Chicago market have been disappointing. And it has been a challenge on, I would say, the majority of deals because a lot of times it's very difficult to get people to do what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. So I guess from the beginning, right, client approaches, they want to talk about new construction. It's a luxury to be able to be the first one in. It's a luxury to be able to be as a part of the selection process and have some customizations and feel like your home is really your own. And I get that. So I think the first thing is that when I take clients to a new construction site, first we need to evaluate where they're at in the process, right? Because if you've got clients that have a timeline and need to be in somewhere at a specific time, it's super important because as everybody knows in the construction world, timing is one of the biggest obstacles. And generally, when a developer tells you that something's going to be ready by X date, you should add at least 60 days on top of that. So first, I think before even stepping foot onto a piece of land or into a building, you need to understand what is the expectation for timing.
The expectation for timing is always, I guess, fluid.
Yeah.
And you do, as a buyer and as an agent, have to understand that Construction is, an extremely difficult process. When one thing gets delayed sometimes for a week, then it delays 4 other things for 4 weeks. So it's difficult to put all that together, and that is definitely something that people need to be aware of when they first get into that process. Now, in terms of expectations, you mentioned something about, typically being disappointed in that end product. But to developers' defense, I would say, when you're buying a resale, you already know what's there. You already see it. You already know what's happening, and there it is. Now, the construction process can be difficult. It can be trying. It can be, very
daunting.
At times, for sure. So when you have all these emotions and it happens over a long period of time, because typically when you're buying a resale as well, it's, let's call it 45 to 60 days and you're done.
Mm-hmm.
This new construction can last 6 months, a year, or something like that. And there's a lot of emotions, a lot of changes in their lives, a lot of things that go up and down in that 6 months. So that's always on top of what's happening with the construction as well. It's not always the construction. It's about people's lives as well that are being affected during this construction.
Well, let me ask you this. So from the ground, right, when you buy a piece of dirt, right, buys the land, from the ground breaking till you are handing over keys, let's say it's a 3-unit, because we see a lot of those in Chicago. Okay. What would you say is the average timetable from breaking ground to handing over keys, pending there isn't some world disaster or something crazy?
I'd say a year to a year and a half.
For a 3-flat?
For a 3-flat.
Okay.
Yes.
And what about a single-family home?
Maybe a year and a half to 2 years for a single-family home, just because it gets more particular. Things are a little bit more specific. There's a lot more, orders, specific orders that have to take place, change orders and things of that nature, whether it's custom cabinetry or custom millwork and all that type of stuff too. So I would say a year to a year and a half for the 3-flat, and about a year and a half to 2 years for the single family.
Okay. So let's say we're going to see new construction. Okay. I would say that I always advise our buyers to, first of all, we always ask the listing agent, who's the developer, right? What work have they done? Whether it's, local, which you hope it is, so they've experienced the market, or in different states, understanding their experience, just like you would, interviewing anybody to do anything for you, right? But one thing is to ask, I find to be helpful, is to ask for a referral. And obviously, they're going to give you somebody that has had a positive experience. But I like to understand, what other addresses has this developer been a part of?
I think that's a big thing. I mean, you can at least go through those buildings and those addresses of what they've built before.
Yeah.
You can see, if prices have increased, prices have decreased, what the building looks like today, what it was 10 years ago, things of that nature, because that's online essentially, especially the resales and things of that nature. So you can go through the addresses.
Well, 2 things with the past addresses. I like to call on the buyer brokers and basically say, tell me about your experience.
You're a good agent for doing that.
Thank you so much. To understand if their buyers are happy, right?
Yeah.
Sure. And some people just are never happy, and it is what it is. So I feel like I like to call at least 2 or 3 to try to get an
that's
average.
What we feel like in the construction world.
Yes. To try to understand the pros and cons of working with this particular developer. Also to see how the pricing worked out, right?
Yeah.
Like, did they stay true to their asking price, which we know most developers want, which we can talk about that in a minute. Were there concessions that were offered, just to try to get an understanding of how much leverage do we have? Is there negotiation room? How quickly do these people generally sell? How quickly are they in and out?
Look, everyone always talks about how there's not much room in construction costs and things of that nature in terms of list pricing, and people throw in upgrades or things like that. But I'm sorry, was there a question?
I don't think so.
Okay. But in terms of pricing and I guess your past experiences or past people that have purchased this before, it is good to get the referral. But when you do get one from a developer, it will be typically someone that he knows likes the place, or he has been friends with, or there's been a smooth transaction with that person. So I think it is a good idea, actually, like you said, to call someone that purchased one of these person's developments 2 or 3 years ago and to see how their clients are doing. That's a really good thing to do.
Thank
Nice
you.
job, Jill.
Okay, so we get the references, get the green light that the developer is reputable and is going to be staying around. Okay, now I think it's helpful to understand, obviously ask for a spec sheet and see what is being included. And
that's the number one thing you should probably be asking for.
And understand what type of flexibility do we have in terms of modifying that spec sheet. And the specification sheet is really it's not a custom home generally. So it's the sheet that tells you what finishes are going in, what appliances, what building materials, all the different details that are incredibly important. And it is your job as a buyer agent to know what is the expectation, right?
So, I mean, yes, I think in the past, the developments that I've worked on, we've actually given more choices to people than typically you would see in most developments.
Do you regret that?
I regret that without a doubt. But I also think people have enjoyed their homes a little bit more. That's their style a little bit more. Now, today's world, I think people just want something that's done and finished, and they don't have to really think about it as much as they used to. It is nice to give some input on some things here and there in terms of colors and potential, layouts of cabinetry and stuff like that. But in the end, today, I think a lot of things are done and spec'd for and completed before you even get there, which is a good and bad thing, I suppose.
What's been like one of the craziest things that somebody has asked you to change from the spec sheet in terms of customizations?
Well, right now, the customization that we're going through is one of the craziest ones.
So we didn't really talk about that.
Well, we had 2 penthouses in a building that we combined into one, and it became a 7,000 square foot penthouse.
Well, back up.
And that is one of the craziest things we've done for sure.
Yes. So you and I are working on a very special project at the moment. Michael is representing the developer. I am representing the buyer. And we, like you said, combined 2 penthouses to create...
Which was already built. The building was up. The walls were up. The stairwell essentially was there. So we had to change a lot of the layout.
It is a 7,000 square foot penthouse in the West Loop that has never really been seen before. It's a 60-foot glass accordion door. Is it 60 feet?
It's about 50.
Okay. But it's an incredibly cool, incredibly custom, basically
it's gonna be
single
a cool
family
space. I'm
home
looking forward to seeing it. It's almost
in
done.
the sky.
We'll see it. We'll all see it soon.
Yeah. So that's been a fun journey. Yeah. You're very good at what you do.
That was one of the craziest ones for sure.
Yeah.
In terms of like little smaller asks, I can't really think of anything on the top of my head at the moment, quite honestly.
So this penthouse deal.
The penthouse deal. So you're asking me about one of the, I guess.
If our marriage can survive this penthouse deal, then I really feel we will be able to survive anything.
Yes, for sure.
So I'm a very emotional person, but when it comes to business and real estate, I don't really cry. Would you agree with that statement?
That's correct.
Okay. I'll cry watching a sad movie, or I'll cry if the wind blows wrong. But when it comes to...
I mean, I think you cried 5 times last week, but not because of me.
No,
nothing that
not
I
because
did.
of you. I'm emotional. But when it comes to real estate, I don't cry. This particular deal going against you, you're very good at what you do. But you're also very nice to me. Always, except when we are negotiating against each other and you have your seller's best interest in mind, and I have my buyer's best interest in mind. And sometimes it gets a little challenging.
It did.
And there's been a lot.
We're through most of it now, but it got challenging for sure.
But there's been a ton of negotiation. Yeah. And I think that's the hard part with new construction is that.
Well, for example, you and I both know how new construction works. We rehabbed our own home together. And
yes.
Rehabbed actually 2 things together.
We didn't fight one time.
And that was pretty crazy.
Not one time during our... we did fight about the size of my closet.
Yeah. We did.
You wanted it to be a foot smaller.
A foot smaller. That's all I wanted was a foot.
And who won that one?
You won.
Okay. And
sure.
Whose closet is the right size? Mine.
Your closet is the right size.
We did not fight. When you and I are very good when we're on the same freaking
But
bench.
that was a great process. I really enjoyed doing that with you. I really
Same.
enjoyed we had a great designer as well that helped us out, Stephanie.
Yeah.
She really did a great job. I think managing the process with us together.
And us.
And us, for sure.
But yeah, so being on the opposite side is a little challenging. But I think you mentioned the designer. So I want to touch on that for a second because I think that is so important. And it's something that I'm really surprised isn't a part of more projects. So sometimes, like I always ask when I approach these job sites, are you working with a designer? Like who's putting together the finishes, the spec sheet, the renderings or whatever. A lot of times there's not a designer. And as much as we like to think that we're very skilled in the design world, we're not designers. And there is so much
to do.
So much.
Like this penthouse that we've been talking about, Lauren.
Yes.
Svenstrup, who's been on the design front.
Fantastic. Yep.
Who basically made this thing operate.
Correct.
In terms of
brought it to life.
Yes. and the floor plan and the finishes and things of that nature.
Yes.
Obviously, George, who was the construction developer.
And how many times a day would you say that you talk to George on the phone?
17 times a day.
That's a slow day.
When I wake up in the morning and when I go to sleep at night, pretty much every time he's there.
George is in our marital bed with us, so to speak. But the designer thing is so interesting because you don't realize how many decisions. It's not just, okay, do you want quartz or quartzite? Or do you want, white paint or cream paint? It's like every single thing that these designers are able to incorporate from their experience, it helps with the lifestyle and the floor plan and the general flow of the home.
They're not
in
the easiest
so
people
many
to
ways.
deal with either, though.
No, and they're not.
It does add time to the process. It adds frustration in the process, but it also brings together the process. So, I think, we're talking about buyers and what their expectations are.
Yeah.
If they do have a designer that's on board, I would expect that things would, move at maybe a little bit of a slower pace, but also you would get what you want in the end.
So
like sometimes people just don't know what to select. They don't know what to do.
Right.
So that designer helps bring that out and put it to life.
And you probably don't want me saying this, but I think it's really important when you're negotiating new construction, if there isn't a designer that is part of the team already on the sale side, to negotiate design our time and say, we want the developer to pay X amount of hours to have a designer.
Correct. I mean, I agree.
Be there for the buyer.
Again, I think a lot of these 3 flats like we've been talking about are spec'd out and done, and that's what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And if you want anything changed, it's going to cost you, basically.
Yeah.
So I think that some of the designers now, don't get me wrong, designers help put these spec sheets together and help put this finished package together, basically. But typically that's kind of done at this point. But if you get in early enough, when they put up the sign, when they're tearing down the building, basically, then you could make some of those changes for sure.
I guess I'm just a huge fan of a designer in general. I feel like there's 3 things that are luxuries that I personally could not live without.
It's a luxury, but it's a
designer.
I think it's, for sure.
A stylist, and then a sunroof in a car.
Those are the 3 luxuries?
Those are the 3 luxuries.
That's all you want?
That's all I want.
Please, you got more than that right now.
So I think that's important.
You're kidding me.
Okay. Anyway, all right. So we're in this new construction situation. One of the biggest problems that I have experienced with my buyers, and one of the worst things that comes up after closing, is noise and sound. And I always joke, if clients want a really peaceful existence and they don't want to ever hear their neighbors in any product that we sell in this market, go move to a 13-acre farm in the middle of Iowa.
For sure.
And be on your merry way.
Sure,
because if you're buying in Chicago, even if you buy a single family home, right? Guess what? Look at all of our streets in Bucktown and Lincoln Park. The houses are right next to each other. So you're going to hear things, and it's especially problematic with new construction because a lot of times developers don't insulate and don't put what is proper in between the floors. So on that topic, I want to hear your opinion on it, but I'm also going to share a trick, and I realize it's not necessarily 100% foolproof, but I always have clients, especially if they're buying not the top floor, so a second floor simplex or a duplex down. I always have the client, if it's like two people or I'll go upstairs and I'll walk around if it's a vacant building, if it's 3 units.
With your high heels on? You're going to ruin the sale right away. What are you talking about?
And talk at a normal tone, nothing extreme, and see how much sound you can hear. Now, of course, you're going to hear stuff. We live in a freaking concrete building that was built in the 70s, and we hear plenty. So there's no 100% solution to 100% sound.
For sure, but there's plenty of things you can do to keep out, I'd say, 85%.
Okay, so if I asked you, I come on site, okay, and I say to you, what is your developer putting in between the floors? Because we're buying, let's say, the duplex down. What would be the response, but what do we want to hear?
Well, I think what you want to hear is essentially what I'm about to say. But again, you will not make this soundproof. Mm-hmm. It is impossible to make it soundproof. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not impossible. It's just cost effectively impossible. Mm-hmm. Developers, especially when they're building these 3 flats or 6 flats or 8 flats or whatever, they cannot put in 12 inches of concrete between the floors. It's just financially doesn't make any sense. So there is a process that you can do to try to get as much concrete as you can. There's a lightweight concrete that you put between the floors for sure. If people don't put lightweight concrete between the floors, I'm not sure if I would even buy the place.
I thought lightweight concrete was not really happening as often as it used to.
I mean, it's one of the 4 things I think that's needed. So lightweight concrete, cork,
okay,
a rubber membrane,
okay,
and blown-in insulation.
Okay.
Those are the 4 things I think you can do essentially to keep out 85% of the impact noise away.
Okay.
There's a couple other things that you could potentially do, but that right there, I think, important.
Okay.
And will keep most of the sound away. You're not going to keep, kids from running around and stuff like that. High heels are going to be a problem sometimes, but typically you're not going to hear much. You're not going to hear flushing toilets. You're not going to hear conversations. You're not going to hear people talking all the time, stuff like that.
Yes, because I have sold into new product where you can literally hear every conversation. You can hear the vacuum cleaner. You can hear every single thing, and it's really a very negative impact on the client's life.
It's bad, especially with people working from home these days.
Right.
I mean, everyone's always home,
right.
So that makes it even more challenging.
So I also think it's a good idea to do a pre-drywall inspection. So before everything is drywalled, to bring, because you're obviously not bringing traditional inspection team until the appliances are in, mechanicals are in, and it's basically.
I don't think I'd allow you to do that.
I knew you were going to say that.
There's no way I
knew you were going to say that.
The city comes in and does all the inspections. What do you need?
Yeah, but don't you want the client to make sure that everything is as good as it can be and that things are being done right?
You can come in and take a look at it and see that, make sure that all the areas like the faucets and things of that nature are in the right place and all that type of stuff. But a pre-inspection for like one of the inspectors usually would bring in, they're not going to know what the heck to talk about that for.
Okay.
I would not allow you to do that. I'm sorry. You can come in and take a look, but it's not like I'm going to change anything.
I have a feeling that if you and I did another deal together and I told you I was bringing in an inspector pre-drywall, I think we would figure out a way to make that work.
You could probably, like I said, bring them through, but we probably won't listen to them.
Okay. Okay, so moving along here. I think one thing that's sort of interesting that it makes sense, but it's a little tricky, is the conversation around financing when it comes to new construction, because
it's tricky.
Developers 99.9% of the time, maybe 100%, do not allow a buyer to put a finance contingency into the deal. So when you're buying new construction, first of all, it's a little challenging because you can't rate lock if the project's not going to be ready
don't
for
know when it's
6 to
gonna
12
change, for
months,
sure.
whatever.
Close for sure.
But the buyer essentially has to just know that they are capable of getting financing.
That's really what it comes down to.
So
is the
you have,
buyer
because you have
has
no
to
out.
be comfortable. You do not have an out, essentially.
Okay.
And in terms of financing out,
Right.
you do not.
So if you go down the process and let's say now you're 2 months out from delivery, so the buyer starts the mortgage process, unfortunately loses their job or realizes that they own too many homes, they can't qualify for the mortgage,
Yeah.
and they now, what happens then?
They basically lose their earnest money.
So you let them walk from the
You
deal,
let them walk from the deal. And
but the
they lose their earnest money.
10%, which is generally
Now,
standard for
if
new
you want to
construction.
be a prick, I guess, depending on where they're at in the process, depending on what selections they made and specific finishes and things of that nature, typically you're going to sell this again.
Yeah.
And if it's not done yet, then there's no loss for you at this point. So look, if someone lost their job or there's a death in the family or they had to move because their mother got sick or something like that, I think we would let them out essentially with little penalty. Again, if it's specific things that they put in there or they made us do, we'd have to make them pay for that and then give them the rest of their money back. I think that's what I would rather do.
Yeah.
Especially in a bad situation that people have. I don't want to make it worse for them. But
Well, you're a very nice guy.
I understand that, but
that's why I married you.
But I understand that. But also, some people just won't, and they'll lose earnest money, which is typically about
earnest money is about 10%, right?
10% of the purchase price.
Right.
As a developer, you can't allow someone a finance contingency if they're going to buy a new construction that's going to be built in 12 months, mainly because you have your obligations with the bank and things of that nature, and you need to make sure that these people are closing, that these deals are solid. So typically even banks that are lending construction loans, things of that nature, won't allow it because essentially you don't have a deal with a construction loan in there. So they're giving you money to build this, and you're supposed to have a certain amount of pre-sales or at least have things under contract or whatever.
Yeah.
Those aren't contracts, and you have to have solidified contracts.
Right. But it's so interesting because as we all know or should know, Illinois favors the buyer, right? If you are selling your home, you put it on the market, a buyer comes along, they write you an offer, you accept it, you sign it, great. It gets pulled off the market. And if a buyer has a finance contingency, they've got attorney review for a week or two. They've got the condo doc contingency. They've got the finance contingency. Obviously, inspection happens, all of these things. And if there's a finance contingency, it's generally 45 days by default, right? And so as a seller, you pull your property off the market, oftentimes in the height of spring or the height of the best time to sell. The buyer goes through all the different, steps of the process. They get through the mortgage, realize they can't get a mortgage. Okay, guess what? They're protected. Their earnest money is protected. They get their money back. And now the seller has been off market for sometimes 2 months and now has to go back to market, generally not a very favorable time. And then generally the property becomes stigmatized, right? Because now it's been off and now it's back on, et cetera. So that stinks. And it stinks to be a seller. I always say that bluntly because it is what it is. If the buyer is not a cash buyer, it stinks. But in the development world, it's almost reverse, where the buyer doesn't really have protection at all with finance. So it's just kind of flips the script, which is interesting.
Finance. I mean, typically, again, if someone's buying a new construction property, you have to be comfortable with the ability that you're going to get a loan.
Right.
And a lot of people are very comfortable that they'll be able to get a loan. So I don't think there's much of a stretch or much of a issue to not have a financing contingency. But, the one bigger thing is that things can change. Rates can change very dramatically, as we saw last year or in the last, 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
So that's the one kind of enigma out there that I think is obviously a problem for buyers, for sure. But it also could get better for them, too. For instance, if they're buying today and 6 months, 8 months from now, supposedly rates are coming down. Who knows?
Okay. All right. So, and knock on wood, I really haven't had an experience with that, a negative experience where buyers couldn't obtain it.
Neither have I. I mean, again, I've been doing this for a long time. I don't remember anyone not getting financing or
having a problem last minute
with a deal. I don't remember one.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I would say it is so, and I'm sure you agree with this, that you want the buyers to have a representation. I mean, obviously, if the agent doesn't know what they're doing or is going to make it more challenging, maybe not. But I think it is so important, at least from a buyer standpoint, to work with a reputable agent who has
I agree.
experience with new construction because every project is different. Every developer is different, and the process is never the same. For whatever reason, it is never the same. And one of the things to be very mindful of is what's included, because as the buyer agent, you want to be able to negotiate up front with the initial offer the changes or upgrades, because like we talked about in the beginning, a lot of times developers want to hold, integrity of their pricing, especially if they're going to be building elsewhere. They want to use that project, those units as comps.
Yeah.
So it's important that, okay, fine, we'll give the asking price, but then as a buyer agent, we always try to work in as much as we can on the back end so that the buyer has value out of the gate and they feel good about what they're getting themselves into, even if they're paying asking price, regardless of the market time, right? So some of the things that I think are important, which you have to usually negotiate: closet credits, light credits. Developers, I know, don't usually put any sort of window treatments in unless maybe it's a single family. And then the audio and visual, right? So we're always sort of asking what is being allocated as far as like an allowance goes for some of these things. But I think it's really important to know, like, one thing that drives me insane is a $5,000 closet credit when you're talking about, I mean, maybe a 2-bedroom, you could get away with $5,000.
There's no 2 bedrooms being built today.
Correct.
Not
so
many, at least.
Correct. So maybe a 2-bedroom, well, for rehab or something like.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think that it's important to know what things are going to cost, because $5,000 closet credit on a 2,500 square foot condo is not going to cut it. And I realize I'm very bougie with my closet credits and what I want from a closet standpoint. I'm the extreme. That's fine.
The extreme for sure.
But I do think that you have to understand what's being included, because, again, I know that blinds and window treatments.
Picture your closet in as we're talking about this.
Yes, that would be good content. Anyway, the blinds, right? Like if you're putting in your own AV, which you generally are, audio, visual, sound, Lutron, dimmers, all the things, right? And window treatments, because a lot of times these projects get delivered with no window treatments. That will cost you anywhere from $10,000 to $100,000. I mean, audio, video, visual could be obviously much, much more. But those are things that are important to know, because if I'm a buyer and I feel that I'm paying this premium, which generally you are, to be the first in and have the flexibility, and now all of a sudden I close, I'm sitting on my couch and I can see Joe Schmo next door running around naked in his house, that's a problem, right? And so to not know in advance what you're going to have to pay for outside of the transaction, I think is problematic. So I think that's super important as an agent to know exactly what
that's where the spec
they're
sheet
doing.
comes in. I mean, you have
Yes.
to. A lot of people that get handed these spec sheets, they don't really look at them. They look, oh, what are the appliances? They see Sub-Zero. Okay, fine, I'll take it. I mean, that you got to look at the whole sheet.
Right.
You have to see what's included and look at the fine print, basically.
Yeah. And one thing I found to be helpful sort of in the beginning is walking around our own home and looking at like every single detail.
Yeah.
For example, I've closed a new construction and realized that there's, 5 bathrooms and there's no TP holders. There's no towel holders. Who's buying those? Who's installing those? Now clients have to spend money on it and have to find somebody to do it if the developer
That is something I typically always forget about.
I always forget too.
I don't know why.
I always forget too.
I forget about it all the time.
All the time.
So that is something that I think gets overlooked in the end for sure. Because it's always this new construction. Everyone's like, oh my God, we got to close, we got to close, we got to close.
Yeah.
Here we are. We're done. Finally, here we go. And then they go to the bathroom like, uh-oh, where's my toilet paper?
Yeah.
That's not the best thing.
Not the best. So I think it's just, you got to really think about the details and like look at other listings, look at your own home and look and see what's included and ask the questions, right?
Yeah.
And if agents on the other side, listing agents, because sometimes the listing agents are not always the best, a lot of it just is what it is. They're not always 100%. And so they'll get frustrated.
You want to make sure you're buying from someone that actually has done this process before as well, whether it's an agent or a developer.
Yeah.
Because typically the sellers or the developer's agent will be doing so I don't know, 70-80% of the work.
Right.
In terms of getting this stuff together,
Right.
organizing the details, stuff like that. So
But you got to slow down the process sometimes, and you got to ask
for
a
sure,
lot of questions up front because
For
there's no
sure.
going back, right?
There's
and
no
so,
going back.
and if you miss
Especially
something,
when you sign that contract and
Yeah.
it gets turned in,
yes,
most
you're done.
developers will say, you know what, you didn't add
You didn't
that.
ask.
That's going to be $1,000.
And
you
like-
know what, you didn't do that. That's going to be $3,000.
Right. And then you realize, oh my God, our clients are buying $1.5 million condo and we didn't negotiate a steam shower.
For sure.
And that's, that is not good.
Someone can charge you $5,000 for that if
At
they want to do.
least. And so everything after that contract gets fully executed becomes a change order.
Yeah.
And it's expensive. And it's, for my clients,
So
which,
yes, buyers need representation.
yes.
They need to
Yes.
look at the details very
Yes.
closely.
And that's my job as a buyer agent, is to make
sure.
sure that they're getting what's appropriate. Because if I'm a developer, why am I spending an extra $10,000 on a steam shower if I don't have to, right? So
well, times that by 5,
Like,
6,
yeah.
whatever is
Whatever.
in the
So-
building.
right. So that I think, right, exactly. So that you have to look at those details. So something that
But
is
that's why things aren't included all the time, is because you got to multiply it by whatever amount of units are in there, and that
Yeah.
becomes a big cost in the end.
yeah, but
Add 10 or 12 of those up at one time, it becomes $300,000-$400,000
For sure.
of stuff.
but if I'm
So
buying $1 million condo and it doesn't have a steam shower in my
I
primary,
agree with you on that.
I'm pissed.
I agree with you on that.
So, so it's
in
important.
today's world, yes.
Yeah, certain
In
details.
5 years ago, not so much. In today's world, yes.
Yes, and certain things that just should be there, right? And
Yes.
certain price points, but that's where the representation comes into play.
For sure.
Okay, so something that I find to just be so interesting, and I have had a lot of trouble with this, is an escrow holdback. Okay, what do I mean by that? So the developer has, after closing, generally there's what's called a punch list, okay? And these are the items that are not complete at the time of close. And so the attorney, the agent, the buyer come up with a punch list of what is outstanding, right? That's given to the developer side, and they generally have 30 to 60 days to complete the punch list, okay? They communicate with the buyer, when can we get in to finish A, B, C, and D. The issue is that if the developer skips town or the developer gets lazy and decides they don't want to complete the punch list, the only recourse the buyer has to get those last things completed is to sue them, okay? Which no one's going to do unless it was some crazy amount of money. So what I have started doing is basically identifying up front that anything in excess of whatever it is, $3,000 or $5,000, that we won't close, basically. I'm identifying upfront, we are not going to close on this property unless everything is complete, maybe minus $2,000 to $5,000 of stuff. Why? Because God forbid, developer walks from $2,000.
Sure. Or they just
most
don't do
people
it.
are going to be
there's
okay.
Guys out there that
There's a
just don't
lot.
do it, for
There's
sure.
a lot. So I have now started implementing that. In the beginning, I will identify, I will say, acknowledge, if we are not closing on this, no matter what, until all of it's done. Because the alternative, which I think is a good alternative, but a lot of developers don't agree to it, is to do a holdback.
Well, no one wants to do a holdback. Why do they want to do a holdback?
But why
would
wouldn't
you-
they? That's my
Because
question.
their money's still sitting in escrow, and then it still needs to be signed off by your buyer to give it back to them.
Right. But if the work hasn't been done,
Well, if it hasn't been done, I can understand that. But what your definition of done and what their definition of done is not the same sometimes. Now, that being said, that's why you do the holdback.
mm-hmm.
But no one typically, I wouldn't even want to do a holdback just because it causes future problems, it causes future issues for buyer and seller.
Yeah, but I guess
I mean, I understand you trying to do that. I get
Yeah.
it. But I would not really want to be a part of a holdback.
Yeah, and that's the response that most developers give. And so, but to me, I've been burned so many times where they don't allow us to hold back money from the developer, meaning if it's $1 million, they, close in at $990 and there's $10,000 that's being held back until everything is done. But I've been burned a lot where it doesn't get done in the 30 days. We have to chase down the developer to complete the tasks, or there's vent covers missing for 3 months, or there's a pergola that was supposed to get built after close that they don't start the work, whatever.
Yeah.
So there's always something, and it's just there's no incentive a lot of times for the developer if they don't have money at stake or money being held back
right.
from them.
You're absolutely
And so from now on, for me at least, I will not do business with new construction unless they understand that we're not going to close until it is incredibly, incredibly close. Like,
Now, that being said, I think, your buyer's sitting there going, oh, you know what, my lease is expiring. Oh, I sold my house. It's done. I mean, they got to get out.
so that's different.
So you don't,
Like the worst
you're
thing you
kind
can
of in a
do
situation,
is
typically,
yes.
it's typically these people need to get in. That's usually what happens.
And that stinks because then it depletes my leverage. Like
Correct.
the worst thing is when you're standing in a property and you're with the developer's agent and the buyer exposes themselves and says, oh, our rate lock is expiring next week. Okay, there we go. Because now you know that these people got to close.
Yes, they do need to close. And yes,
Yeah.
we would like them to close. But honestly, I don't want them in their space when it's a bunch of stuff still needing to be done. That's not good for anybody. That's not good. I mean, because literally I get texts every day
Yeah.
from someone that closed, let's say, 30 days ago.
Yeah.
About this little thing and that little thing and this little thing. And I think that it should be this way. I think it should be that way. It's mind-boggling sometimes.
Yeah.
So people's opinions are different of what needs to be fixed and what isn't. So some of that comes into play for sure.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. If there's like missing countertops or something
Yeah.
like that, no, you're not
Yeah.
closing. But if it's, usually punch list items are paint blemishes and, little ticky-tack things like that, basically.
Yeah.
At least that's what usually happens with us, I should say.
Yeah.
And, then what's the big deal? Just a few little items, basically. Now, that being said, we have had some lingering things on the recent project that I'm doing that aren't to our fault. So for example, someone, some tile chipped or tile cracked after it was put in. The people that replaced the tile then cut the heated flooring. So now we have to get more tile and then replace the heated floor. Like that type of stuff happens, unfortunately. Yeah. It's nothing to do with lack of developer knowledge or developer, the way development or this developer is delivering a product. It's not like it's his fault or her fault, I should say.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it plays out sometimes. It's just to no fault of anyone, things like that just happen and they linger sometimes.
Sure. Let me ask you this, because we got to wrap up here soon. What is something that is maybe a pet peeve of yours as far as the buyer agent goes? What is something that is annoying or frustrating?
That they disappear. Like they sell the product and then they completely disappear for fucking 6 months and then they come back, right?
Ready to get their paycheck.
Close. Can you send me the closing statement, please? I'm like, okay, great. Good to hear from you.
So it's important for the buyer agent to stay involved.
I would say stay involved for sure.
Stay afloat with what's going on.
Sometimes, obviously the buyers, they start contacting me and I get that. But if everyone's still on the chain or whatever, that's fine. But I'd say 30% of the time people just disappear.
Okay.
And it's very frustrating because you're doing all the work and all the communication.
That makes sense. So I guess my last thing here, because we could go on all day. New construction is a wild, wild beast, and it's constantly changing, and costs are changing, and the process is changing, and all the things. So we could talk all day about all the intricacies. But I guess it's interesting how this market, we used to see if you looked left, you looked right, there was just cranes right everywhere. Like there was one time, I think, a few years ago that we looked up and there was 30, 40 cranes in the city of Chicago. And now all of a sudden it feels like they don't exist. Obviously the costs have gone up, but what are you seeing as far as a general statement goes in the building world in Chicago?
Well, I think it's market driven for one. You go to Miami, you go to Phoenix, you go to, some of these other areas, there's cranes in the sky for sure.
Yeah.
We were in LA last weekend. There were cranes everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's market driven for one, but to that extent for the last year and a half or so, obviously construction costs have gotten very high. Interest rates have been a problem, especially on the construction side of things, because when we're talking about a 6.5% interest rate for buyers, we're talking like an 8.5 to 9% on these construction loans. So it got extremely unaffordable to build any of these buildings. And that's why we don't see them here in Chicago.
Okay. Well, you're definitely one of the better developers, agents, definitely one of the cuter ones
Oh, I think.
in the city. So I hope to do more projects with you and keep
Well,
learning from you.
In terms of projects, we will need to find another one day for sure.
Yes. And we've been together almost
Until that day.
my entire real estate career. So thank you for all your guidance and love in
My
construction
pleasure.
and
You're one of the
expertise.
best out there as well.
Well, thank you. And I love you. And
I didn't
cheers.
know we had to say I love you to each other.
I don't know. Okay, we're done.
All right, goodbye.